Hey, thanks everyone for being here. This is my TIC presentation I've been working on. Been working on this cycle for about 6 months. It's called Supporting Students in Class, the Three-Pronged Approach. And what I hope to do today is, what I want to do is for you guys to learn about what I did, the theory behind it, what I did, and what I found. And really, what I'm looking forward to today is hearing from you guys your observations about what I did and the results, what your experiences have been, and any other things, suggestions that you have. So thank you guys so much for being here and giving me your time. So the class that I'm working with is my B block, and it's really kind of a crazy class. It's a lot of very high-skilled students. It's a lot of students who have more difficulty being in class, have had more difficulty with math in the past. It's got a lot of characters, it's got quirks, it's not very socially cohesive. There's a lot of, there's some juniors, there's some freshmen, there are some sophomores. A lot of them are in kind of the learning skills group, and a lot of the honors group. So it's a very interesting class, and it's been a challenging one to support this year. So the goal of my cycle is, like, in the context of this class, is helping all students be successful through re-engaging in tasks when they're struggling. And that is what I was trying to solve for. And started off, with many different kind of types of interventions, or many different ways to kind of approach this, and came up with a three-pronged approach, because I thought kind of a one-size-fits-all for supporting this heterogeneous class wouldn't work. And so the theory behind my approaches were that if students start helping each other, and students start going to other students for support, then they will learn to rely on each other more. They'll have more effective parent-group interactions. And when students explain to one another, they're learning more. They like learning that way, and it's really helpful to explain. The second approach to the prong is grouping or huddling, and the idea there is that people who need similar support I can reach more people when we're huddling groups that need similar support. And then lastly, for when teacher interactions are really necessary, either one-on-one or with small groups or pairs, being able to do really short, effective interactions that are led by guiding questions that I'm kind of anticipating some of the struggles that students are going to have. I'll be able to support more students, and they'll be more satisfying for the students. So that was the three-pronged approach. Chose 7 focal students, just kind of based on one assessment, like students who scored below a 2 on an assessment we did in Q3. So these are students who were unsuccessful today. These are the students who we're going to track for the class. And the goal is for them to re-engage after interventions, and also show that they've worked through misconceptions through the interventions by scoring a 2.5 or above. So that was like the measure, trying to make it measurable and equitable as a goal. So that's what I did. That was the goal. And the idea was for me to be doing this in most of my classes, in 2/3 of my classes. And as you guys know, as teachers, we face a lot of time constraints, and it's not always possible to do it, but finding ways to do it in a sustainable way was another part of my practice goal, so that I was prepared to do this more often. I had good fortune to visit some experienced teachers, and I want to point out a couple things that I learned that I thought were really helpful from these observations. Is when students, effective interactions from teachers or with other students are really much more effective when students have something that they can refer to, such as their notes, or posters around the room, or other materials. It's so that they have something to work with, so we're not starting from scratch if a student is really behind in the misconceptions. So I found that this was something that I learned from Ms. Pritchard. The other thing is being really explicit about when students should ask for teachers' help, when students should be helping each other. Something that I observed in Ms. Health's class as well. So some things that I found out, when you do an intervention, when you start a cycle, you kind of like think that you're going to do it this way, and things change a little bit. Well, the basic methods didn't really change super much during the observations. During the cycle, some of the things that I found were kind of like really necessary and really important were having guided questions prepared ahead of time in a notebook that I could rely on and I could really find handy. And this was like what I'm talking about, like having those done for like 2/3 of my classes. So I'm like really ready with those to come in. And also it's thinking about like, when our students are going to need like the different approaches to interventions. And then, so having guiding questions prepared ahead of time. And the other thing was re-engagement goals. Like, can't just be like, do an intervention and said, you got it? Okay, good. It's like, you got it? Okay, let's get, show me it for problem 4 and 5, or show me for the next 2, and then when I come back here, I want to see what's going on with these problems, or I want you to be complete with these. So I thought that was a really important thing that I learned, is that after an intervention, even if it's a student intervention, to say like, Emma, go talk with Dariana, and I want you guys both to have questions for Don when I come back. Cool. Actually, I should mention this. Putting an expert list on the board, or having I was helped by or helped on papers is something that I tried. And I think it's something I probably don't think is necessary all the time, but when I think an activity specifically lends itself to it, that was a good thing. Student learning claim. That in most cases, in terms of meeting the goals, I have been able to identify specific interventions that work for students. It hugely differed by student. So I think you guys will understand that some students are really good with seeking out another student for help. Some students are more shy about that, need a little bit more teacher intervention. Some students like the huddle. Some people like being grouped with students that they are more familiar with. And this is a list of just an idea to give you for my 7 focal students, some of the things that I found were necessary to get them back on track.
Sorry to interrupt.
So I brought donuts. Here, help yourselves. Okay, and so for and I also learned like what didn't work for some people. Like some people, like for example, for Bella, she definitely did not get on track after a short teacher observation. She needed to be paired with someone that she had a social connection with in order to move on successfully. In terms of meeting the goal for the, good morning, Lauren. How are you? In terms of meeting the goal, which was 2/3 of students would be successful on an exit ticket on a day where I tried the specific interventions. This was the specific results from the day. So as you can see, about 40% of them were successful in terms of a 2.5 or above, which is a little, below what I was shooting for. And there are other students that received targeted interventions that day that are students that do need support, and I think the strategy was effective for them. So I feel pretty good about that. Yeah, what's up, Shira?
I just have a question. Do you have a sense of like why the targeted interventions seem to have worked better with the students on the right than the students on the left?
It's a great question. I think that Well, I'm going to get to one of the challenges. One of the challenges that I found particularly with these types of interventions is when there are absences and lateness and sometimes like people aren't, especially in a class like this, that people don't always have the go-to person to have the that they can, you know, like rely on to talk to get peer support. And I think in this case, in particularly with like Faith and Dariana, who work really well together, and they both work through a lot of misconceptions together, and the short teacher interactions work really well with them. I think that's why they were successful, and I think that for Jamal, Keen, and Sophia, I don't know. I think that it was just a little bit more challenging for them that day. So thank you. It's a great question. So relatively good on the student goal. Still working on that. And for the teacher practice claim, I would be rating myself as kind of the beginning of applying, is working towards getting there in terms of being able to make, you know, appropriate teacher moves to get specific students going. And one other thing is making adjustments to what we're going to do in class. Like, oh, the students are not ready for this, or students are ready for this, is an area that I've really grown. I still need to work on effective whole class intervention. And this is an example of the teacher practice notes with kind of like coming in prepared in certain ways and ready to write students' names down when students are either having misconceptions or students can become resources to other students. So yeah, back to the challenging, restructuring partners has been a challenge, and especially in this class. One thing is like when you send one partner, like if you have a specific example is like if you have a kind of a heterogeneous pairing and the student who is generally ahead is really curious and wants to get something, and then the other partner is not as engaged. If you send the partner who's really curious to go get some help from someone else, you can leave that other partner like completely lost, or so that is one challenge that I've been having to work for, kind of beyond just asking them to stay together. So something that's still working on. And then also something, this isn't really a negative, but learned that some activities lend themselves better to students supporting each other, and some are more effective for teacher support. For example, if it's problem solving or if it's practice, and there kind of are right answers or or approaches that people can share, that's really good. That students say, hey, why don't you go see what Dariana is doing to approach this one? That works really well. However, ones that work that you're doing that like require detailed work, that like students, it requires writing, and it requires students to really show their thinking, having students kind of, that requires more teacher intervention rather than to get the motivation, to get students the motivation to do that. You can't say, see what, you know, it doesn't work so well, like, you know, see what Kevin did to support his answer is not as, I haven't found that to be as motivating yet. All right. And so I think the main things that I've learned, which I kind of said before, is when students talk to each other rather than the teacher, they get deeper learning, and also the teacher is more free for targeted interventions. So that has been successful in terms of making me more available, and students are happy working with each other. Interventions need specific steps for follow-up. You can't just do an intervention and not hold students accountable for getting work done. So that's something that I'm really happy about learning and doing. And again, students having resources that they can refer to in their notebooks or in the room is really makes interventions more effective and satisfying for the students. So I think the things that I want to work on next year is incorporating, making the three-pronged approach, student supporting student, this is for Lauren, student supporting students, huddling students that are having similar misconceptions, and very targeted short teacher interactions, making that like more an explicit part of the culture of the classroom. Like, this is the way that we, this is the way that you can deal with misconceptions or get help if you're struggling. So look forward to making that more part of it. And also just look forward to hearing suggestions that you guys have for me about things that have worked. Again, things that have worked for you, things that have, things that have worked for you, any observations you have on my approach and results, and whether or not your experiences have been similar. So, do you guys have any questions?